Well, hey everyone, welcome to Future Stack with Jeff DeVerter. That's me. That's right. I'm a CTO, a thought leader, a technology evangelist, and more importantly, your host here on Future Stack. Now, my goal here with Future Stack is to help you as individuals lead in this new digital age. And I'll do this through decoding the latest announcements, through understanding the technology trends, looking at the latest in the news, and lastly, through some incredible interviews with leaders in this space from all over the industry. And holy cow, do I have a great one for you here today. So buckle up, folks, and welcome to Future Stack with Jeff DeVerter. All right, and first out of the gate here today is an article from over at TechCrunch, and they're talking about the cloud revenues this year. Do you realize that they are pushing almost $80 billion? Now, some of the cloud providers, like Microsoft, have some misses in their core Azure offering, but their overall intelligent cloud growing. But $80 billion, folks, that is so much money. Now, what also gets super interesting is if you look at some of the data that comes out of organizations like the FinOps organization. Now, they're going to talk about how much of the cloud is actually wasted. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in my conversation that I have with David Linthicum, but we dig into the fact that while there is so much transformation that has occurred out into the cloud, well, really, migration out into the cloud, if we're going to really think about this, the reality is not a lot of it has been transformed to utilize what is truly cloud native. Now, the cloud boom happened and started back in the early teens. I remember when I was working over at Rackspace in my first go round over there. And, Rackspace even built their own cloud. It was pretty incredible. They still have it today. But the reality is they initially started with this competition mode, trying to be all things like an AWS or what would become Azure at the time. And the reality was that as people got more and more excited about moving out into the cloud, many folks saw it as a panacea, as a way to solve problems. But what they didn't do was refactor and rethink what they were doing in that move out to the modern cloud, because they were taking antiquated, non-modern VMs and such and just snow shoveling them out into the cloud. And that accelerated through the teens and hyper accelerated once COVID showed up around 2020. And where we found ourselves in the past couple of years is a lot of folks considering, is the cloud really where they need to be for their workloads? Because again, there is a geographic modernization of your infrastructure. Think about it as cloud infrastructure modernization. I'm going to go from whatever old servers I might have been on in my data center or elsewhere, and I'll move them out into the cloud. That must make things all better. Now, some of those new VMs that you have access to inside of the cloud, well, they really were better. They were running on newer infrastructure and made things, well, more better for a while until the bills showed up. And there was two challenges, really. It was around that bill, because it really is more expensive if you're just going to lift and shift a VM out into the cloud and not really think about how you're buying or where you're buying. The other challenge that showed up really was, do all of these VMs need to be on all the time? And then lastly, the buying cycle changed as well. The buying mechanics changed from this every couple of year hardware refresh that finance and a lot of very important gatekeepers were involved in, to really becoming this thing where the folks down in IT and even developers have access to the console and are spinning up machines without a second thought. And that's brought a lot of folks to a reckoning with their bill and thinking, do we really need to have our workloads out there? Well, it's a complex conversation and not one that you can whitewash and take with a very broad brush approach to answer. You'll hear this later in my conversation with David, where we dig into the fact that really, this is a workload by workload conversation that needs to occur and you need to consider. So folks, I'd encourage you to go out and look at this article from TechCrunch that talks about the spend that's happening out in the cloud. I'd love for you to even think about, is our company's spend in the cloud appropriate spend in the cloud? Who are the gatekeepers? Where are we thinking about where these workloads should operate? And are we taking a measured, thoughtful approach to utilizing infrastructure that is fit for purpose for the compute and the applications that we actually have? This is what I'd love to challenge you to go do. Now, next up in our news today is an article from ZDNet. Now, ZDNet's talking about how AI, well, the future of it, really thinking how it can help solve a lot of these cybersecurity challenges that we've been seeing for so many years now. Now, first, let's unpack why that would be so. Because cybersecurity is a really challenging one, because these folks, they're sneaky. They're getting in and they're doing really bad things ultimately to your infrastructure. And they're doing it in very subtle ways. Now, that is the key word here, folks. Subtle. Subtle is hard for humans to recognize. Well, just look at the conversations I have with half the people. I don't pick up on the subtle cues they're giving. Now, think about these subtle cues that are coming from your infrastructure that you have to consider when thinking about, are the right people down messing with our data or our workloads? And this is what the bad guys are really counting on. The facts that, quote, you won't notice what's going on down inside of there. And that's where AI shows up in spades and really, I think, this isn't a hype one. This isn't AI washing a challenging problem that we've seen. I really do truly believe that this is a place where AI wins. AI wins in this scenario because AI, well, you've got to see the individual bits of data and look for the trends in that data that humans might not see. I used to always say that it's like finding a needle in a haystack. The reality is, it's like finding a needle in a needle stack. AI helping to win in the cybersecurity battle. So what I'd like to do now is to take you to a conversation I had earlier today with David Linthicum. Now, David, you'll know as really the godfather of technology, evangelism, and thought leadership. He's been writing about AI since the 90s. He had a book that came out then, as well as somebody who has been very thoughtful and pragmatic about not only cloud, but also AI and where it reigns supreme. We're going to dig into some additional topics, so you're going to see a shorter version of that here in this conversation, but I'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast where you'll be able to hear the longer conversation that I had with David Linthicum. David, one of the things you've talked a lot about lately is, in the past months that I've noticed, is really taking a hard look at this, cloud, all cloud or nothing. And the reality is it's a lot more nuanced than that. And so first, I just want to give you a chance to really share your thoughts on why everything isn't necessarily destined for public cloud.
Yeah, everything has a specific use case and purpose, and therefore the platform that it should be on needs to be optimized for the purpose and the use case. And that's something that's been true since the beginning of IT. And cloud doesn't eliminate that. And so we have to look at the aspects of the workload and how they're coupled to the data, behavior, what they do, the purpose that they solve, the business value they're able to bring back, and we map that to the optimized platform for that. And sometimes it's going to be in the cloud, sometimes it's AWS, Microsoft, Google, sometimes it's going to be in a managed service provider, sometimes it's going to be a colo, sometimes it's going to be on premise, sometimes it's going to be on my wristwatch, sometimes it's going to be on my phone. And so I never understood this all or nothing attitude. It's like back in the early days of cloud, and of course I came up as a CTO for different cloud companies, and so people thought I was an evangelist for cloud, and people would come out, we're cloud only. I said, well, that means you're going to make a mistake of moving things to cloud probably about 75% of the time, depending on the applications that you have. So why wouldn't you look at the cloud, look at the applications and triage them and figure out where they should move to? And it always seemed like a reasonable approach to me. And then I took some arrows, back in 2010 to 2013 when I was on InfoWorld, writing about that. Even my editor at InfoWorld sent me a note one time. He goes, "Why do you hate cloud?" I don't hate cloud. I love cloud, and I think it's a viable platform. What I hated was the fact that people were misapplying it and not looking at the architecture for these things to make it work. And I think we're missing a lot of value. And you see a repatriation movement that's been going on for the last 5 years. That's in essence a reaction to all of the workloads that should never have been moved to the cloud. They weren't going to invest in re-engineering and refactoring them. And so they run very inefficiently on the cloud, very expensively. And so they're pulling them back on premise. And that's just an admission of making those mistakes. And there's a lot of that stuff that's going on right now. So as we move forward, the same rule applies. In other words, we have edge computing. Of course, everybody has AI workloads that they're dealing with right now. And the ability to find the most optimized platform is not that hard of an architectural exercise. I bring my students through it all the time. And it's going to save you billions of dollars in value for these companies moving forward because we're able to use these IT assets in more optimized and more valuable ways. And to me, it's just common sense, but I end up explaining this to lots of people every day, even on my YouTube channel and my podcasts and the articles and reporters and people I talk to. But it doesn't seem that hard to do the math.
As this repatriation back into the physical data center, into a private cloud is happening, there's actually a sense of not just picking everything up, but what really needs to go back. And now they're balancing things. But that brings us to the topic that everyone has to deal with now, and that's multi-cloud. Everybody has a definition, David. What's yours?
Definition of multi-cloud is just plural public clouds. So obviously a hybrid cloud is a private and public cloud paired. So a multi-cloud is going to be more than a single public cloud provider. It's just that easy. And we're dealing with something that's a bit more complex than a single cloud deployment or a hybrid cloud deployment. And we're doing so to provide best of breed options.
Yeah. Now, David, you also mentioned that as companies are thinking about multi-cloud and how to deal with it, you've recently written an article about 5 things that folks need to think about. And one of those is, thinking about the failure of considering data portability. Why is that an important factor?
Well, it's an important factor because the data has to be shared amongst the different cloud providers out there. And one of the things I think people are making a mistake when they move to a multi-cloud deployment is they're just building silos. So they're moving silos into AWS and Microsoft and Google, and they're not thinking about how to exchange data either in real time or sometime where it's going to be migrated every year or so, or sometimes when you're taking an application off of AWS and moving it to Google or, to whatever, even back on premise, that the data has to be in a portable state. In other words, if we can't move it, it's locked into the environment, then it's not going to do us much good. So a lot of people, when they migrate to cloud, they go to these cloud native databases that are only supported by a single cloud environment, leverage some proprietary structure that they use. Normally it's object based, but it's their own version of object. And it's very difficult to move from cloud to cloud. So I always tell people, think about this. Think about leveraging common systems and common products across the cloud providers, because it's going to save you money in the long run, because you're going to end up having to move these things from cloud to cloud. So everything's going to be ubiquitous. And so trying to pull everything back onto a single platform, which was in essence what we did when cloud was cool. Right. It's still cool, but it's not that.
It's got a few bruises.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to get people in trouble. And so you have to think about this stuff as a single platform. And that's something that's very difficult to do. Most companies in IT are organized around the platform teams, and they don't communicate one to another, and they don't share information. They don't share data. Application deployment teams are different on those environments. And I'm telling you, you have to come at this in a unified way, or else your heterogeneity is not going to be able to scale. You're just going to become less secure, less efficient, you're going to have lots of outages, wonder why, and that's because you're letting the complexity dictate how you do your job. You're not putting your job around the complexity and figuring out how to manage that stuff through commonality and common abstraction layers, which is really what's going to save us in all this.
David, what an amazing time, though. Imagine being a young architect coming up in this time and having all of these tools at your disposal, and ideally a company that is open to the fact of doing things the right way. An incredible time to be in technology.
Yeah, it is an incredible time to be in technology. I just wish more people were, thinking logically this way. At the same time, we have a critical talent shortage out there. Yeah. We don't have enough architects, and best I can tell, we have 10 architect jobs chasing one qualified candidate.
The desire for more AI is driving more digital transformation, I believe, than I've seen as a catalyst in many of the other waves that have come before. And there really is, to use a phrase that you've used recently, a lot of AI washing going on. We're just slapping AI now with AI inside. I think my coffee has AI. Isn't that great? It tastes better. But the reality is while there is a lot of that going on, there are a few areas, I believe, that are making significant impacts in the world through the use of AI. And one of those areas are for knowledge workers, the folks who sit in front of their computer every single day inside of their organizations, trying to find the information they need just to do the job that they need. And I think that's an area where AI is winning today and has a huge amount of runway yet to go.
It does. And, I just think of the tasks that we do now with the advent of, generative AI, things like ChatGPT and Gemini and things like that. I'll get these huge papers that are probably 20,000 words. and I'll throw it into the LLM and have it spit back a summary, so I don't have to read the 20,000 words. So therefore, that takes a couple hours out of my day to go off and do some other things, or the ability to process notes or analyze data, the ability to do lots of things we used to do as a human task. And people are worried about it, firing everybody. I think it's going to create more jobs than it's going to lose. We're going to shift around, very much like the Industrial Revolution.
David, thank you so much for taking time today. Lastly, how do people find you? You're all over the place. You're teaching classes. You are producing content. Where are the places where we can find you?
Well, LinkedIn's probably the primary place. I got about close to 200,000 followers out there. Become one of them. Also, my new YouTube channel, about 6 months old, called Cloud Computing Insider. About 90,000 subscribers out there. Also, last 15 years, I've been writing the InfoWorld blog on cloud computing. Still post there twice a week. Talk a lot about what we're talking about here. I have a new YouTube show out with theCUBE called AI Insights and Innovation, which is also a podcast. So it's the Cloud Computing Insider podcast, or just Google away, figure out where I am. I'm everywhere.
All right, links to all of that in the description. David, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there it is, folks, the first episode of Future Stack with Jeff DeVerter. I'm so thankful that you were here today for the first one. Huge thank you to David Linthicum for being a part of the show. I'll be back each week with another episode of Future Stack. Until then, if you want to get a hold of me, send me an email, FutureStack, all run together, at diverter.com. That's right, FutureStack at diverter.com. Until then, folks, I hope you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week on Future Stack.